I am honored to present Mark Eckarhdt. Mark is CEO of Common and the creator of 1 Million Truths, the groundbreaking web-based video record of individual Black Americans' personal experience of racism in America. Mark is ordained in the White Plum Zen lineage and a Zen Peacemaker International board member. Mark will present 1 Million Truths. Mark, you have the floor.
Thank you, Francisco. Appreciate that. Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's good to see all of you. Hey, Jeff, Chris, see some friends. It's great to meet new friends. It's truly an honor to be here and to have a chance to share with you. And I just want to acknowledge Dr. Shankar Brown's contribution. Thank you so much for that. And I have to admit, I was sitting here going, damn, why didn't I go first? I have to follow her. So before I dive in, I wrote down a note as I was listening to the words a few minutes ago. And I'm assuming that everybody's pretty dialed in here into racism and the dynamics that are playing. But just to kind of really frame it, I do a lot of work with the largest peace building organizations throughout the world. These are organizations and these are professionals who are asked and requested to go into the most unstable, most violent parts of the world and help people stop harming themselves and each other in the most atrocious ways. Those peace building organizations are typically based in the US and they deploy abroad internationally. They are now coming home because of what's going on in the United States. So Search for Common Ground, for example, worked extensively with Shamal Idris, who's the CEO over there, and many members of his team and the staff. They, over their 40-year existence, they have yet to really stand up operations in the United States and here in America. And they are coming home with a quickness because of the rise and the surge in white extremism and violent extremism. So I just wanted to frame what I'm going to share with you with that. 1 Million Truths is really in the spirit of just telling the truth and seeing as clearly as we can, and feeling as deeply as we can, and understanding as deeply as we can. Before diving really deeply into that, I'll just share really quickly, for those of you who don't know me, that I'm totally obsessed with farmers and tractors. I'm a big fan of chocolate chip cookies. Reese's Peanut Butter Cups runs #2 there. And as Francisco said, I spent 15 years studying at the Santa Monica Zen Center and took my vows as a priest and had the opportunity to make a choice. The choice was to continue down the road and eventually be given permission to teach and open up a Zen center or do something else. And I chose capitalism, believe it or not, as the vehicle and the forum for me to express my vows and work to fulfill on my vows. And so 1 Million Truths is really built on the last 10 years of experience in the realm of capitalism, working with organizations like Search for Common Ground, and some of the best marketers and communicators and designers in the world, and people who are really working very hard to produce and create innovative new models. So as I'm going to share with you, all of the work that we're doing currently is just a result of the time spent really deep in the trenches with people, understanding how to build things, how to make things go, and how to send a message out across culture in a very large and broad way. So for our time together, I'd like to just invite you, and I have a presentation here. I'd like to invite you just to sit with the question, how has racism affected you and life around you? As I've gotten deeper and deeper into the work of 1 Million Truths, that question has become central. And it's a question that has proven to be very relevant to everybody that we've interacted with and we've had conversation with, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, background, economic status, level of education. And so for those of you who have been immersed in this work, if you're already aware of the costs, just keep sitting into the questions that question as I go. And if this is the first time that anybody's posed that question to you, just lean in and pay special attention throughout our time together as to what comes up, emotions, feelings, thoughts, all that kind of stuff. So just to kind of give you a little glimpse into my life and how racism has impacted me. When I was in my mother's womb, racism was already determining my life. So I was given up for adoption at birth. At birth, my birth name is John Ibergen, which is interestingly of Dutch origin and descent. My birth mother's name is Barbara Ibergen, and she's second generation Italian American. She met my father in the Catholic Church in 1968. They fell in love, and soon thereafter, she ended up pregnant. She got pregnant. She hid her pregnancy. She never saw a doctor because her parents were racist. There was just no way that she felt that she could share the fact that she had fallen in love with a man of color and that she had become pregnant and intended to give birth and raise me, her son. So she hid the pregnancy. She moved away 1 month prior to giving birth, having not seen a doctor or gotten any health care along the way. And soon after giving birth, it was actually 4 or 5 days after that she was actually able to hand me over officially to social services. But I read the report, and apparently she had a psychotic breakdown because of just the trauma around that act and that decision and that set of action alone. But so she handed me off, and 4 months later, I was adopted. I was adopted by Claire and Myron Eckarhdt, who were white. I have a brother and sister who are white as well. I'm part of the second generation of transracial adoptions, or kids who were adopted into families of different race and ethnicities. And so I just share this with you because, there's a very tragic side, the fact that my birth mother had to make the choice or decided to make the choice because of racism in her family. But fortunately, I was adopted into a loving family who just has embraced me from day one, like they intended to do. And I'm here today doing what I'm doing, having this conversation with you as a result of that. But that's just, my story is just the kind of thing, or the kind of area, the kind of response, or the kind of things that might show up for you as you start to inquire into the question about the cost of racism in your life. So I'm going to get into 1 Million Truths and how 1 Million Truths came to be. So soon after Trump got elected, and I don't want to get into the politics of that, but soon after Trump got elected, I started getting chased and harassed in my neighborhood. So we're looking, early 2017. I would be stalked in my neighborhood. People would roll down their window and yell, "Hey, Negro, get out of here. Hey, nigger, you don't belong here. We're going to kill you." I was, on multiple occasions, I would be pulled over to the curb in my car on my phone, just taking a business call, and private security personnel or police officers would approach me. And every time they would say, "Hey, we got multiple calls about your presence here." And so we had to come out and see what was going on. The truth is that I was never farther than 3 blocks away from my home with each encounter and each experience of that. And so that was a big shift. Of course, I had my experience with the racism throughout my childhood, my life, but there was something distinct and there was something very different about what I was experiencing under the Trump umbrella. And so I reached out to many of my friends of color, my Black friends, and lo and behold, they were experiencing a surge in encounters and instances, all the way up to burns being crossed on lawns, to people being violently attacked, and so on and so forth. So I just sat with that. I knew something was up. I could just sense that something had really shifted that I needed to pay attention to. So fast forward to Martin Luther King's holiday, 2020, so a year ago. I woke up that morning, and for whatever reason, I felt compelled to put pen to paper. And what came out, what I produced as a result of that, was a Facebook post that went viral. The Facebook post had 2 parts to it. The first part was my acknowledgement, my thank you to the civil rights leaders from the 50s and 60s, and just really appreciating them for paving the way for me to be a CEO of a global corporation and doing the work that I'm doing. The other part of the post was my account, or my experiences with racism, beginning with the first one all the way up to being chased in my neighborhood under the Trump administration. And so the thing that really knocked me off of my feet was not the fact that the post went viral. It was the response from people who were not African American, folks who are not Black or not people of color. It was just shock and awe and the gasp by the mostly white members of my community that really, really took me back. It just knocked me off my feet. And I found myself asking, how is it that people that I grew up with and people that I've worked with for decades are so surprised to hear about my experience as a Black man in America? So fast forward to through the succession of murders that culminated in what happened to Mr. Floyd. It's day 2 of the protests. And I wake up in the middle of the night and I have 1 million truths seared in the front of my mind. I didn't know what it was going to become. I just knew that I needed to pursue it. And so I got up the next morning and I made a couple of phone calls to people very close to me. And the rest is history, so they say, or the rest is history in the making, as they say. I have to admit, there's been a lot of hard work. There's been a lot of tears. There's been a lot of pain that I've had to deal with and be with in terms of part of other folks. There's also been a lot of laughter. There's been a love, and there's been tremendous caring. I can honestly share with you that I've never felt more connected to other human beings. So as I was thinking about this gathering, this plunge, it reminded me a lot of the sessions that we would do at the Zen Center, 5 or 6 or 7, 10, 15-day periods of intensive practice. And going in was always a little rough. Stepping out of the normal routine was always a little rough, and a little irritating. But then something would happen over that period of time. And there was always a moment where it got dicey, and I always found myself kind of on the cusp of considering whether or not I wanted to complete session. But ultimately, I made it through every one, and with every one, what was waiting on the other side is the glory that humanity is. And I really believe that this inquiry and plunge into race has that waiting for all of us at the end as we pop out to the other side. So 1 Million Truths is a media platform that really comes out of just the experience of not being heard as an African American. This is something that people that I've spoke to and my friends have reported over and over and over again. I was also very frustrated with the narrow range of expressions that make the headlines. And so I set out to create a platform that can convey the scale of racism in the fabric of American life, as well as build a digital archive that will live on through the years and through the decades. And so over the last several months, I've been going out and the team and I have been inviting Black Americans to share their truth and just to be very honest, and in many cases for the first time, about what racism has been like and what folks have experienced throughout the course of their lives. So coming up, I have a handful of videos here. The first one is my truth. And so here you'll hear directly about my experience with racism above and beyond what I shared at the beginning of our time here. Here it comes. And just give me a thumbs up to make sure that we have audio.
The first time I was called a nigger, I was 8 years old.
Great.
I happened to be on a soccer field and retrieving a ball that had kind of gone off. I was retrieving it for a little girl who was on the pitch. I wasn't even doing anything. I wasn't even messing with her. I just ran to help get the ball and help her out. And she called me a nigger just for that. I can't even count the number of experiences of being out with my childhood white friends only to hear them say, "Oh, look at those niggers over there," as if I was invisible, as if I wasn't even there. I could talk about the fear and the desperation I felt when I was accused of abducting a young lady. I could tell you about the horror of being ambushed by a group of Nazis while attending a party as a teenager. I could share in vivid detail the experience of being in a business meeting with my business partner and having them make off-color jokes and the pain that I felt. It's not about one experience. It is about the constant, consistent experience of having to deal with racism. and having to constantly weave in and out of it and around it because it's everywhere. And it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. The world is changing in a way where we're going to be dealing with climate-related events. We have economic disparity to deal with, including social justice. But we don't have any more time for this nonsense. The way we're living, the way we're relating to each other, how we're treating each other is not sustainable. And so we need to do this work now so we are prepared for what's coming at us. Together, we can absolutely create a better future.
Okay, so there's my truth there. So I touched on a number of different experiences of racism, of course. And so for those of you who are sitting with that question, what's the cost? Again, if there hasn't been, or there doesn't seem to be any cost to you as a result of racism in your life, think about the meetings that you've been in. Think about the things that you've heard about in your community, or maybe have witnessed in your community where you didn't get involved and things like that. So part of our theory of change, and I'll get into this a little bit later, suggests that none of us, there's no free here. We're all incurring costs, whether we know it or not. And so by creating these videos and choosing this very honest, vulnerable, direct approach to sharing experiences, it's my goal and my intention and my hope is that it will open up some space for some things to start popping up about your past. Maybe it was you were in a relationship like my birth mother was, that wasn't ultimately going to be allowed to be. What was the cost of that if you were to walk away with it, had to walk away with it, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that we've learned, and I also kind of touched on this in my video, is that the first experience with racism for African Americans or Black Americans comes between the ages of 7 and 15 years old. Now, I've spoke to literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Black Americans in the context of 1 Million Truths. And there has not been one person who does not report their first experience within this time frame, or this age frame. If you think about the implications of that, and children clearly are not equipped to deal with that kind of incoming fire. And it sets off a series of reactions, and it kicks off and it starts the formulation of a mindset that is not necessarily a healthy mindset. The other side of this statistic is the level of trauma that everyone that I have spoken to about this project, every Black American that I've spoken to about this project, acknowledges the trauma that they're dealing with and struggling with to this day. And each of them can trace that back to the first experience with racism. So we have a significant portion of our population that are fighting for equality and justice and security and fairness and all those kinds of things, but they're not doing so at the highest or the fullest of their capability and potential. And that started back between the ages of 7 and 15. So here's Gina Belafonte, and she kind of speaks to this. Gina Belafonte is the daughter of Harry Belafonte.
I was 7 years old when my father's best friend was murdered. The person who murdered them was a racist. It was the first time I saw my father ever cry. For years, I never really thought about the trauma surrounding that. I always looked to humor to mask feelings.
So the scenario that Gina shares with us is learning about the assassination of Dr. King. Her father and Dr. King were best friends. Mr. Harry Belafonte was a significant leader in the civil rights movement back in the day. And so there they were, watching the news, receiving the information of the assassination. So this is the first time that Gina told this story publicly in an open way. And so she has been carrying it with her since the age of 7. And she goes on and on and on. And the over 90 minutes of truth or testimony that she afforded us, she generously gave us, about the implications of that. So because we're here in a Buddhist Zen context, greed, anger, and ignorance made sense for me to kind of pull on. So these are the three poisons. And so I'm going to go right into anger right here. The next truth I'm going to share with you is Nia Hill, very powerful activist. She's a woman who grew up in Oklahoma. And here comes her story about experiencing the anger that comes in the form of racism.
My name is Nia Hill. I'm from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Was raised in a suburb of Oklahoma City, actually, all-white suburb. I am a Kappa Alpha Theta from the University of Oklahoma, as well as a Zeta Phi Beta. So the question becomes, how did I become a member of two sororities? Well, the answer is simple. I didn't know that the systems were separate. And my freshman year coming in, I rushed with all white girls. And I didn't know that it had never happened before. So it became really an inciting theme for the racism that had already existed on the campus before my arrival. I just was the spark. So it was incumbent upon the administration at the university for them to provide protection for me during the 13-day process of Rush. And they did that by putting me in an entire building by myself for the 13 days and all the other girls in another building. There wasn't a day or a night that went by that I didn't get death threats under my door, shots through my dorm room. It was, some people call me insane for doing it or just plain stupid. I just knew that there was something wrong. And if I could make it right in any way, I was going to do it, no matter what it cost me. Did it cost me? Yes. It wouldn't come to cost me in the ways that it has until many years later. So I'm still paying that price. But what it also did was create a certain kind of character that hopefully becomes a part of my legacy or doorway for other brown girls who look like me, who they said, no, you don't belong here too. I'm just here to say, yes, you do.
So very, very scary, unfortunate situation that Nia found herself in simply for pursuing her curiosity, her inspiration, her desire to be in relationship with other students on campus. Here's another thing that has been consistent that we found as a result of speaking to Black Americans throughout the country. Everyone that I have spoken with has had their lives threatened at one time or another. You know, you may recall me sharing in my truth being attacked by a group of Nazis, ambushed. I could go on and on and on. I had no idea that it was that bad. I thought that my situation, as did Nia, isolated incidents where one's life is being threatened, but it's not. It's not. And so again, just underscoring the urgency around taking real, direct, well-informed, skillful, compassionate action to disrupt these dynamics that are in play. So greed. The next truth that I'm going to share with you is Michael Marshall. Michael Marshall is an incredibly brilliant man who spent his entire career on Wall Street and in the financial markets and industry. And so here's his take on what's going on there.
Wall Street has afforded me a lifestyle, but it's also afforded me the opportunity to look behind the curtain. People are very clever with money. People have built systems that reinforce one another, media that tells stories of European perfection that absolutely doesn't exist. But the layperson on the street, they believe that Europe is the Valhalla. Capitalism works if there is balance, a system that invites everyone to participate equally. We don't have that. We have a financial aristocracy, full stop. Part of what holds the structure in place is a caste system. Of course, it's this patriarchal system. At the bottom of that, and you have to have somebody at the bottom for everybody to have their station. The bottom of that are African Americans.
So we all know that capitalism needs rethinking, and we know that business and economic growth took hold in the US based on free labor made possible by slavery or through slavery. So it makes sense that Black Americans would end up at the bottom of the class structure. It also explains why immigrants from Asia and other parts of the world don't report the same experience or the same degree of experience, and statistically generally make more money and hold on to more wealth than Blacks. So one of the key takeaways from hours of conversation with Michael, hours and hours and hours, is the notion that race is used as a lever to keep that class system in place. Okay, I'm gonna go on to ignorance here. So when I set out, when I made a commitment to do this thing we're calling 1 Million Truths, I really thought I knew racism. I thought I had a grasp on it from the inside out, top to bottom, et cetera, et cetera. And I rapidly learned that I don't. And I'm very, very ignorant about a lot of it that's a result of just being Black in America. And so to some degrees, I'm totally immersed and focused and lost in my experience as a Black man in a country that has a terrible history and presence of racism in it. And that's been really hard for me to swallow, just how ignorant I am. So here's a number of ways that we can look at racism. So I've learned there's private, so individuals, there's institutional. There's foreign players, national players, and class warfare that tugs on the strings of racism for various means and purposes. Foreign players, Russia, China, Iran, parts of the Muslim community, been leveraging, particularly the Black Lives Matter movement, in leveraging, pulling on, and stoking the coals of racism to their benefit, to their advantage. We have national players, so we saw that playing out at the Capitol on January 6th, so white supremacists, fringe groups, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's this class warfare, which Michael talked about. So what's the spectrum of racism across the board? So we've got genocide all the way across the board to equity. Where does America fit in all of this? Are we towards the left? Are we towards the right, the equities? Where are we? How do we orient ourselves as we compare and stand in relationship to what else is playing out throughout the world? China is taking out a significant portion of its Muslim community with sterilization techniques and other techniques. In Nigeria, Muslims, Black Muslims are killing Black Christians. This is based on race, it's also based on religion. So we heard earlier about the intersectionality of it all. So when I started out on this road called 1 Million Truths, I wasn't aware of these things. They weren't just part of my thinking. And now I'm aware, and it's really raised a lot of questions about what is this thing that's going on, and why is it taking on the particular form that it is in America? Law enforcement. So there's a number of people in the Black community who skew more towards the conservative side of their social politics, who are screaming at the top of their lungs about violence in the Black community. So here's some statistics that we don't hear about a lot, but there are members of the Black community that are pushing back rather strongly about some of the assertions that are made by Black Lives Matter, for example. How do we sort this out? So on average, 1,000 people are killed unjustly a year. 25% are Black, 50% are white. Most of the killings reported here are justified, like I said. Some are unjustified, some are hard to tell. So that also shows up in numbers when you look at the whole data set. Blacks and Hispanic cops are more likely to shoot than white cops are. So I started hearing these statistics, I started having these conversations, and it just kind of turned everything upside down for me. As I said, whites are more likely to be shot by police. Police are more likely to go hands-on with blacks, and there's probably a number of reasons. There are a number of reasons for that. Bias, rage on the part of cops, resistance to complying because of the history and the origins of policing in this country, lack of trust, et cetera, et cetera. Blacks in the US are 13% of the population, commit 50% of murders, commit 66% of all crime. Blacks are 6 times more likely to be murdered than whites. 90% of those killings are committed by blacks, and 95% are black on black crime. So again, there's portions of the black community that leads with this when asked to engage and enter into a conversation about racism. So they have a different take on racism and how it plays out. And they have a different take on where the responsibility starts and stops. This is all part of the conversation we need to be having. These are all the things that we need to have on the table as we move towards creating a world and a society and a country that works for everyone. So I'm quickly going to go over our theory of change, and then I'm going to be quiet. So in looking at dozens and dozens of ways of addressing this issue, I found it very hard at times to get people connected to the cost of racism in their life and around them. And so what we learned very quickly is that calling somebody racist creates a bind. Nobody self-selects, or very few people self-select as a racist. And as soon as you put that out there, you end up having to negotiate or fight to see who's right. And accusing someone of being complicit turns moderates into oppositions. And so that second one has really been hard. It's made our work a lot harder in the sense that there are a significant number of people in America who are moderates, who are on the fence, who are not quite sure which way they're going to go on these issues. And that's one of and that part of that is just due to the information wars and all the things that are happening as a result of social media and just online technology and algorithms there. But what we have found is the moment you call somebody or accuse somebody of being complicit, they start to resist. And the more you do it, the farther they go, and they end up becoming active opposers. And so 1 Million Truths will not do that. Rather, we're offering, and this comes from my Buddhist training, what if racism is a phenomenon that has all of us in its grasp? It's not something that's happening to Black people and people of color only. It's not something that white folks are not involved in. We're all involved in it. So what if it's a human phenomenon that has all of us in its grasp? And what a privilege is a form of delusion that prevents people from connecting with the cost of racism to themselves and in their life. If I had more time, I'd share a quick story about an ex-girlfriend of mine who, after watching and receiving my truth soon after I'd created it, texted me back with a wow. A couple of months went by, we ended up in a 3-hour conversation where she got connected to the cost and the difference that made for her. So I'm just going to end here. How has racism affected you in your life? How has it affected your self-expression, your personal power, your creativity, energy, health, well-being, connection, relationships, love? Where has it showed up in your communities, in your boardrooms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And so I'm going to turn it back over to you, Francisco. Thank you, everyone, for affording me the privilege of sharing my work and the work we're doing at 1 Million Truths.